Good afternoon to all those in the chamber here and those people who are watching in today, and thank you for joining our North Somerset Recovery and Renewal webinar. As many of you know, we are making stringent efforts to try and communicate all the actions that we're taking in North Somerset over all sorts of issues, and we're delighted that you can join us today to go through some of the things we're doing around recovery and renewal. Of course, locking down is relatively easy in terms of actions, but opening up and recovering our economies and coming up with the solutions to all sorts of problems around renewal are a much more difficult issue, and therefore we wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to talk to us, ask us questions and communicate with us to find how our thinking is and in what directions we are going. This afternoon we are going to have an update around the public health from Lenny, and then we'll go straight on to recovery and renewal overview with a presentation, and then we shall have some questions and answers later in the meeting. I would like quickly to take the opportunity to ask members participating just to introduce themselves quickly around the room so we know who's here. So if I can, I'll switch off my mic and members will have to remember to turn theirs on to do so.
Jo Walker, Chief Executive.
Lucy Shomali, Director of Development and Environment.
And Matt Lenny, Director of Public Health.
Thank you, and I suppose I should introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Councillor Mark Canniford, and I'm the Executive Member for Business and Economy and Employment. So what we'll do now is we'll hand it straight on to Matt Lenny, Director of Public Health, and he will go through the latest data and the latest information around the COVID issue.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to introduce a couple of slides which give a bit of information about where we are in terms of the numbers of cases in North Somerset at the moment. I'm going to talk a bit more about what we're doing to try and plan for preventing cases as much as we can, and then respond effectively if we have any increase in cases. So at the moment, the best way to compare different areas is through a rate per 100,000 of cases. And as of yesterday, North Somerset has a case rate of 1.4 per 100,000 over the last 5 days. And you can see in the slide that that compares reasonably to both the South West rate, which is 2.2 cases per 100,000, and the rate in England of 2.9 per 100,000. Important to note that that's relatively low across all three comparators there, so our own South West and England, but we have had some higher cases in certain parts of the country, and we'll continue to watch to make sure that we are alerted early to any increase should that happen in North Somerset. It's also important to note that one of the other indicators which is available is around the cumulative rate of cases. So our case rate is 406 per 100,000, so that's all of the cases that have happened since the start of the pandemic. And that's higher than the South West, which is 228, but lower than the England rate of 459. And important to note that the higher rate for North Somerset can largely be explained by the particular issue we had around the outbreak at Western Hospital and the additional case finding that came on the back of that through increased access to testing in North Somerset. So that's slightly historic, but that stays with us because it is a cumulative rate. And finally, in terms of the numbers, just looking at our death rate, which is 67 per 100,000 population, and that compares to 51 for the South West and 85 for England. So we are slightly higher than the South West, but less than England. Because we've had a higher number of cases, we probably expect our death rate to be slightly higher anyway, particularly given our older population. North Somerset has one of the highest percentages of older people of anywhere in the South West. So, on the second slide, this is about just giving recognition to the fact that North Somerset, alongside all upper tier local authorities, have been asked to put in place a local outbreak management plan, and that's an overview and description of all of the actions that we're trying to take forward to both reduce the risk of transmission of the virus and also to respond quickly as we need to. So at the moment what we're doing with that plan, which is published on our website, and there's a little link on the side of the page there, we're trying to bring that plan to life now by testing different aspects of our approach through scenario testing with a number of our partners and colleagues. So different meetings that we have. We had one earlier today with our Outbreak Engagement Board and our Health Protection Board. We'll also be talking to colleagues in the community, in health and social care, a range of places to make sure that all of our plans are fit for purpose and sit within the new Contain framework, which was published by the government about 10 days ago, which sets out the activity that will take place at national, regional and local level to try and work effectively together. Picking up on that theme, it's important to note that we continue to work very closely with our neighbouring local authorities and Public Health England as the lead response agency for health protection. And we have good arrangements across the southwest of England to be able to share good practice and to try and work as consistently as possible in our approach. We're also trying to expand testing as much as we can. So we've had recent announcements around the expansion of regular testing in care homes, which helps to protect both residents and staff and keep track of any new cases. And as of today, we're just testing a new mobile testing unit in Clevedon, similar to the one we've had in Weston-super-Mare for a number of weeks. And that's useful because we then have the right preparation for any increased testing requirements should we start to have a rise in numbers. We're also doing quite a range of work to try and prepare for winter alongside the current pandemic because of the associated risks that come with transmission of disease. We've also got practical things to think about, like social distancing will become harder when we're outside less and people are naturally forced inside to socialise or to do other things. So we need to think about how we get ready to respond to any potential increased risk that comes with that. And I suppose just to finish off, what I'd just like to say is that although we have had some lifting of restrictions, we are seeing some changes in the way we're being able to go about our daily business, whether that's shopping or seeing friends or family. But I just want to say that it's really clear there's no room for complacency. The virus is still very much with us, as we're seeing visibly at the moment with people being asked to wear face coverings as they go out and about. And maybe just use that as a quick prompt to action to think, keep distance, keep using the mask, face coverings in those settings, keep the hand hygiene and other protective measures as strong as possible, because we will need to maintain those behaviours all the way through the duration of this pandemic, which is likely to be many months. And I really appreciate all that everybody's doing in that space to try and adopt those behaviours. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That's great. And just so those viewing in today have the opportunity to ask questions of Matt and then later to any of us, if you go on to www.slido.com, and the path to get in to ask questions is #NSRecovery, all one word. I'm not sure whether it has to be in capitals, but apparently I'm getting a no, it doesn't have to be, but that's #NSRecovery, all one word, and then you can ask questions on that site. So over to Jo Walker.
Thanks, Mark. I just thought I'd start with a bit of a reminder, I suppose, about some of the challenges and opportunities that we face in terms of context for recovery and renewal. And in addition to COVID itself and the challenges it poses in relation to outbreak planning, there's also a huge challenge in terms of our economic outlook, so depth and length of a recession, whether that's national or indeed international, and also the impact on our own population, so how any recessionary impacts, even nationally or regionally, impact on North Somerset and our North Somerset population. And that's really key in terms of thinking about how we respond to the pandemic on a local level. In addition to that, we've already started to have conversations with some of our businesses about preparing for Brexit. So we know that that will generate quite a bit of work for some of our businesses, and again, some challenges as well as opportunities. And I think the big question, which feels like a real lottery type question, is when will there be a vaccine? So what's the duration of living with COVID? And as we live with COVID, for us as a council, it's about how do we continue, as we have done to date, but how do we continue on delivering business as usual? How do we plan effectively for outbreaks? So we had our first session this morning at North Somerset Partnership, where we started to discuss our outbreak board, and we will have another outbreak board later on this month in August to start really galvanising our outbreak planning. But we will definitely be, and have already started actually, to run some scenarios around putting that planning into focus. And then finally, I think the key is, as we start or continue the journey, I suppose, of unlocking, it's refocusing back on our strategic objectives. So we had a corporate plan that we developed and had approved back in February by full council. And the challenge for us now is how we really invigorate that plan again. We need to really accelerate our journey of improvement and innovation, whilst we remain flexible and ensure that we really seize the opportunities to transform whilst living with the pandemic. So the corporate plan is going to go back to executive this week, so on Wednesday, and if you follow the link on slide 6, it will bring you to that published corporate plan. The vision and the values still hold strong. We passionately believe in an open, fairer and greener North Somerset. Our values are about acting with integrity, respecting each other, embracing innovation, caring, and collaboration, working collaboratively together. However, we have reviewed the corporate plan to ensure that it actually reflects some of the impacts of COVID. And so we've included a series of new actions in there around minimising the harm caused by the pandemic and promoting recovery, sustaining the surge of community support, and enabling improved digital connectivity and speed. So those are the 3 key aspects, with economic recovery featuring very heavily under the first bullet point, but along with health and well-being. So moving to the next slide. That response, recovery and renewal plan then, we've developed separately in addition to the corporate plans. So on top of actually reflecting some additional actions in the corporate plan, we thought it would be helpful to complement the corporate plan with a 2-page document which is highlighting the goal of minimising the harm caused by the pandemic and to promote successful recovery and renewal from it. So it effectively shows a plan on a page, but some of the actions within there, they're all reflected back into the corporate plan. So the corporate plan still becomes our main document of reflecting all of our ambition, including recovery. But the next 2 slides really just show and re-emphasise the vision, the values, but also show that goal around minimising the harm caused by the pandemic, and shows the priorities that are directly linked to that goal. Working with communities, for example, following the national guidance, and recovery focus, renewal focus, thinking about how we can engage more effectively with our residents, communities and businesses, how we'll make sure that we're lobbying effectively with government to ensure that the right support is in place for our businesses and that that's happening as quickly as possible. And we've seen that through the pace at which we've delivered some of the business grants, both Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. And especially with Tranche 2, I think we're on our 3rd iteration, and Mark might want to speak a bit about that later on in terms of the success of that, or rather I think Lucy's covering it. Also, we're very keen to explore how we can be more flexible in terms of our approaches whilst we go through the pandemic, and that really reflects, in part, being nimble to deal with outbreaks, as I've mentioned before. And finally, I think there is a huge opportunity to seize whatever opportunities, those silver linings of living through the pandemic, to help deliver our vision and our priorities. The second page of that, I was going to say plan on a page, it's a plan on 2 pages, we couldn't quite fit it on 1 page, is just flagging the new actions that will also be reflected in the corporate plan. Some of that is around maintaining essential services, which is inherent to our daily service delivery. But some of it is around how we seize opportunity to transformation. And there are 4 key pillars that effectively we've created. One is around health and well-being, and that's really ensuring the recovery for individuals and families, managing outbreaks, which I've already mentioned, and promoting well-being, and ensuring that our care sector, our care providers, are supported through their recovery phase. And also addressing potential surges in demand for health and wellbeing services, so the likes of children in care, for example, or mental health support. There's clearly an aspect around communities and inclusion. We've had fantastic response from our communities, towns and parish councils, in terms of how you've supported us and our residents in engaging. Hopefully you felt more empowered to work collaboratively with us in terms of engaging, but also supporting our communities. And the question or the challenge for us all is, how do we sustain some of that momentum? And it's really about ensuring that our communities continue to feel empowered, but also remain very resilient. I think we've brokered stronger relationships with our voluntary sector, and the challenge for us as well is, how do we really make sure that we don't lose that and that connectivity again with towns and parish councils that we work in partnership with. And ultimately, it goes back to that fairness part of the vision. How do we tackle inequalities through working more closely with our communities? The final strand, which I'll dwell less on because I know Lucy is focusing on that in a little bit, is around economy and place. Really trying to ensure that we have a sustainable economic recovery. We're supporting our businesses. We reinvigorate our placemaking thinking that we had high aspirations for pre-COVID, and that again we're renewing our visitor economy because they're so important to our economy, and also enhancing the schools agenda. And finally, but not least, really looking at our transport and digital infrastructure. And the very final strand is around, or pillar is around, how we work. So looking maybe more internally, how we as a workforce and an organisation can work in a flexible, agile way, embrace digital more and develop our staff and ensure their well-being. And importantly, and that's the link to my next slide, how do we actually financially recover? Because we as an employer and an organisation have been really challenged financially as a result of COVID. And the next slide really focuses in year. So in this financial year, we have had a significant cost pressure associated with COVID. In the table, you can see that's about 10 million. We've had income losses of just over 7 million. We've had to delay some of our transformational ambition. Some of that has slipped because of our focusing our resources on the immediate response, but also now it was initially lock-in, but unlocking. And there has been a significant impact on our collection fund. And by that, I mean the impact of maybe reduced payment of council tax and business rates due to the challenges that both residents and businesses have found themselves in. What that's meant then is that there's been a tremendous amount of lobbying on a national basis, and government has stepped forward, and we have received already in the first 2 tranches of government funding just over 11.8 million. The government have also identified that we can phase the collection fund loss of 8 million across the next 3 years. Whilst that's beneficial in 2020-21, it does cause a significant problem to us over the next 3 years. So we continue to lobby government around that collection fund loss. And what that leaves us with is a gap of just over 8.5 million, which we have been working with the executive around identifying some savings and releasing some reserves to help fill the gap, but also continue to lobby government around. And I'm pleased to say that we did have an additional tranche of government funding since the report's been published online of 1.57 million, and there is an ongoing dialogue with government about income and sales and fees, so we would hope to see additional funding. But significant pressure this year, and the financial report again in slide 10 In the pale blue on the right-hand side, there's a link to the financial report, and that's going to executive on Wednesday along with the corporate plan. The next slide, slide 11, is really focusing on the medium-term financial plan. So again, we brought a plan that covered this year right the way through to 23-24 to executive and to council back in February. And all that I wanted to illustrate on this slide is that the gap or the financial challenge that we're facing has increased as a result of that collection income loss. That figure has increased. There's been some minor revisions to forecasts as well, but the overall gap at this moment in time is 26 million. Again, we continue to lobby hard for additional funding, and with a spending review coming, and this was where the slides, I suppose, end up going back to my very first slide, how we will fare in the midst of an economic downturn, I think, is the big challenge for us, particularly as we know colleagues across the public sector, for instance, health colleagues will also be lobbying for additional funding through that spending review. So I think the important thing for us to keep doing is to refine our plans. We are beginning as senior officers to start thinking about what savings we can generate, what ideas we've got to try and fill some of that gap, and also we would hope that government will step forward with additional funding. And certainly one of the biggest areas is adult social care, where we're still awaiting the outcome of some of the sustainable funding around adult social care, which has been talked about for a number of years. The review of local government funding has been delayed again, so that's unlikely to happen anytime soon this year. So some challenges financially, both this year but into future years. But despite those challenges, we remain ambitious, and I think that's shown in the corporate plan, which is why it's important to look at both of those documents in tandem. And that ambition goes beyond, as I say, into renewal. But before we get to renewal, we have to think very closely about recovery. And on that note, I'll hand over to Lucy Shomali to take us through the detailed recovery work that's going on.
Thank you very much, Jo. So I wanted to talk about the two aspects of our economic recovery and renewal planning. Firstly, the immediate measures that we're putting in place coming out of lockdown. That's largely in response to government guidance and available tranches of funding. And then to talk about the planning that's underway to recognise the very severe economic impact of the pandemic and the work we're undertaking to start to address this and begin the process of recovery. So firstly, the immediate measures. So the government has asked councils to implement a range of measures. So in particular in relation to walking, cycling and social distancing, we have guidance that requires us to look at how we can provide more space for walking and cycling, how we can shift capacity from public transport, how we can enable social distancing in the public realm, particularly in our town centres, and how we can encourage a green recovery and lock in the growth that we're seeing in walking and cycling levels and have seen throughout the pandemic. So we've had two phases of funding announced by DfT. The first was just over 100,000 for temporary schemes, and the second is around 400,000 for more permanent schemes, and we'll be submitting an application for that funding by the 7th of August. So our approach has been to install a number of temporary traffic management measures in various locations. You'll probably have seen in our town centres red and white barriers appearing in some of our streets and public spaces. They are not the most attractive way of providing that necessary segregation, and we are working hard to see if we can identify ways to improve the place-making potential of some of these measures, for example, through replacing these with planters in some locations. And we are keeping these locations under review, so we're learning from experience as things change on street and new government initiatives are launched. So many of these measures that we've implemented have been for a particular purpose, but we do want to retain a sort of longer term perspective and look at the opportunity to enhance and in some cases make some of these measures permanent. Then the second main tranche of funding that we've had from government is called the Safer High Streets Reopening Fund. So this is just under £200,000 of funding, which was announced in late May. And this is to support small businesses that operate alongside public spaces and have customers. So this is for councils to put measures in place. None of the money is to go directly to businesses themselves. And it's very much about working with business to help them to make their operations as safe as possible and to look at how we can enhance our town centres and improve safety and access to our high streets. So we're looking at this pot of money alongside the previous funding to encourage walking and cycling, so that where we can, we're looking at a comprehensive set of measures across a number of parts of our town centres. We've been working through a very joined up process of officers from a range of different services working together with a member reference group with representation from across North Somerset to develop plans to allocate the funding. So we're starting to get applications. We've had a number of applications submitted through the input of town and parish councils as well, and there's a series of proposals coming forward, and some of those are listed on the slide. So these are not just in our town centres, but also in some of our larger villages. So we're looking at Congressbury, for example. We're looking at measures in Clevedon. We're looking at measures in Weston, Long Ashton, and other parts of North Somerset. And we're also looking at measures in some of our smaller locations, including Banwell, Winscombe, Rington and Milton Hill. So the ideas are still being developed for a number of proposals there, and we're looking to use that funding in as creative a way as possible. Again, the guidance from government has been quite constraining in terms of what we can do. These are meant to be temporary measures rather than permanent measures. So we are trying as hard as we can to make these look as attractive as possible, but fundamentally the purpose has been to keep people safe while our towns and high streets reopen. One of the specific projects that we've been promoting is to create some safe outdoor seating areas on the basis that a number of our pubs, bars, restaurants and cafes are reopening and do want to be able to serve customers, but to serve them in a way that is safe. And one of the ideas that we've had is to create these new outdoor seating areas in our town centres that enable people to purchase food and drink and then go and sit safely within the town centre in our public spaces. We've commissioned an organisation, Richmond Event Management, who are well established in the west of England and deliver a whole series of, have in the past delivered a whole series of events very successfully, to lead on this project for us. This will run until the middle of October, and we've identified locations in Weston, Clevedon and Portishead, and we're in discussion with Nailsea about the potential there as well. So essentially what the offer is a series of bistro tables and chairs that meet social distancing requirements that are in place from Thursday to Sunday from 10 a.m. in the morning till 9 at night. It's an ongoing process, so we will be assessing and reviewing as we go to determine whether we need to move the tables around, put them in slightly different locations. And we've also got the agreement with the provider that there's very strong COVID-19 compliance with oversight around cleaning of the furniture between uses, dealing with waste, etc., etc. And the next slide shows the outdoor seating area in Weston-super-Mare. You can see there the tables and chairs out over the last weekend, which would be very, very well used by members of the public. So we're very pleased that this seems to be having the desired effect. It's creating spaces which people can actually come and use, and encouraging our businesses to reopen and to start to do some positive business again. Just a little bit around some of the immediate measures we put in around supporting our local businesses above and beyond what I've just mentioned. So there's a range of support and guidance that is being led through our economy team with some of our local providers, including guidance on what businesses should be doing to help ensure social distancing. We are directing our businesses to our In North Somerset website, where we have all the up-to-date information from government and also the initiatives that are happening at a local level. We've been administering government grants, and as of this week, I think we've now been able to pay out just around 99% of the available funding from government. So that's over £40 million worth of grants that have been paid out to our businesses. We use social media to provide regular updates to business, with advice and guidance on reopening. Our economy team has been available 7 days a week throughout the duration of the pandemic and will continue to be so as businesses start to reopen and to re-establish themselves. We're working very closely with regional partners, including on the WECA-led regional strategy, and are involved in the task force that's been set up and a number of the sectoral theme groups there to make sure that North Somerset is well represented and we're integrated with the regional work. And we have a range of different intermediate and targeted projects specifically in North Somerset aimed at our businesses. I've talked about the outdoor seating spaces, but we've got a number of others as well, including a new emerging cultural programme to bring activity to our high streets, looking at how we can digitally adapt our town centres and provide greater support around digital inclusion, and a new traders platform called Made in North Somerset, a web-based traders platform called Made in North Somerset. And we're also working with some of our bids to look at establishing local websites as an alternative to shopping in the town centre, so almost creating virtual high streets in addition to be able to come into our town centre. So a whole series of measures that we're delivering. Then just very quickly to mention the planning for schools reopening in September. So all pupils will be expected to return in September, and government has issued some quite detailed guidance around this. Government is looking to try and target that at least 50% of journeys to school should be through an active travel mode, i.e. walking or cycling. This is highly ambitious, and we are looking very carefully at how we can deliver this. We're very keen to do this because it integrates with our climate emergency strategy and our wider active travel strategy. But in many cases, it will require safety measures to be put in place, the right training for children, and the right publicity so parents are confident that their children can walk or cycle to school safely. But we've got some very proactive work underway at the moment. We're in the process of contracting the necessary vehicles and drivers to provide the dedicated school transport services. Recently, the DfE guidance has changed, so it makes clear that social distancing rules have been removed on these services, which does remove one of our biggest concerns, which was about the availability of vehicles and the capacity of these vehicles to carry pupils to school. We're also engaging with local business and employers to reduce other demand for public transport during peak school travel hours, because obviously quite a number of our pupils do use public transport, both train and bus, to travel to school. So we need to manage that carefully. And we're also engaging with schools around the potential to stagger school start and finish times, because again that will help with the capacity of our direct transport provision, but also public transport. And realistically, I think we've got to accept that there will be an increased use of cars for some of the longer journeys to school where children can't be accommodated on public transport, or realistically switch to active travel. So again, we're having to take that into account. So that's some of the planning that's underway for schools reopening in September. So moving on to the work that we're doing in terms of planning for the recovery, recognising the very, very significant impacts that the pandemic has had. So the way that we are looking at this is to understand the national picture. So what's happening at a national level? What's the impact of the pandemic been across business community, across individuals and across different sectors? And then what does that mean from a North Somerset perspective in terms of the economy as was and the economy as it is now? It's also been about how we work with our business community to really understand what their issues are and how we can work together in partnership to develop a response to the challenges and some of the opportunities that are also coming out of the new ways of working and delivering business activity. So we're working towards the launch of a new economic plan. We're hoping to be able to bring that forward in September and anticipate it will be a very simple manifesto for economic recovery in North Somerset. developed through a process of engagement and connecting with the wider regional work. In terms of the engagement, Councillor Caniford is chairing our Economic Renewal Steering Group, and we've been very pleased with the representation on that, which has come from across the whole of the business community in North Somerset. So very wide sectoral representation, including aviation, logistics, finance, the green economy, real estate, the visitor economy, SME and startups, digital, 2 housing associations, including Alliance Homes, creative sector, our rural economy, and the education sector through Weston College. We've also got residents represented, so people who work in North Somerset represented through the DWP, VANS, Voluntary Action North Somerset, CANS, our LGBT network and our BAME network, and I've mentioned Weston College. We've had 3 very active Zoom sessions so far, focused on developing the core foundations for the recovery strategy, which are emerging as one foundation which is very clearly around people, one which is around digital infrastructure and digital business, and the other which is around delivering business in a green and climate-friendly way. So I mentioned at the beginning that we are basing our strategy very much on the impact of the pandemic on the North Somerset economy. So that's required us to do a real deep dive into what the nature of the economy is. And as you can see from this slide, even if you just look at it in terms of the number of segments on the circle, it's a very diverse economy in North Somerset. And it reflects quite closely actually the national picture. So, for example, we've got 14% of our economy's manufacturing, we've got about 20% is real estate activities, we've got about 10% in wholesale, 5% construction, quite a significant percentage, probably around 12% if you add education and health together in terms of public sector, and then other segments which are actually smaller than you might anticipate. So the visitor economy, which is very visible in North Somerset, doesn't actually generate a lot of value for North Somerset, so that's actually quite a small segment on this circle. And one of the things that I think we all recognise is that North Somerset has traditionally had a very high level of out-commuting. A lot of people travelling to Bristol or further afield or heading south to other locations for work on a daily basis. So a lot of those high-value activities that our residents may work in are not necessarily based in North Somerset. So I think that's quite well represented now on this slide, because this actually shows employment by sector in North Somerset. So actually most significant employment is in those lower value sectors, not lower value, I don't mean it in that way, where wage rates are much lower. So wholesale and retail, health and social care, admin and support services, for example, accommodation and food, which would include the visitor economy. So these are really important sectors for North Somerset in terms of the number of people they employ, but they're not necessarily creating a high value in terms of gross value added for North Somerset. But they are critical for our residents, so we need to be very aware of the impacts of the pandemic on those and how we can continue to support those sectors. I think this slide will be familiar to everybody. It's very much the cliff edge that the pandemic brought to the economy. So the ONS in April showed literally falling off that cliff edge in terms of the impact on GDP and monthly estimates. So I don't need to dwell on that. I think that just represents very visually the direction that the economy has gone. And then if you look at what that means for North Somerset's economy, so again, looking at that, the segments on the pie chart, so a very significant decline across a whole series of sectors there. The OBR estimates that overall GVA reduction will be around 37% over a 12-month period. Different sectors have been impacted in different ways, but some of those that have been very significantly impacted, manufacturing, for example, 14% reduction, real estate activities, 20% reduction, and so on. And then in terms of what that means for people, so this slide gives some information around different sectors and the percentage of people that have been furloughed nationally. So it's very high in certain areas. So accommodation and food, which would be our visitor economy, 78% people furloughed nationally. The arts, entertainment and recreation, so the creative sector, 65%, and then a number of others there as well. So those sectors are significant for North Somerset. Accommodation and food, 11% of our residents are employed in those sectors. So a large number of our residents have been impacted by furloughing. And clearly for many of them, there remains a significant uncertainty as to what will happen when the government's furlough scheme comes to an end in October. And one of the things that we've noticed is that vacancy levels in North Somerset have reduced by over 50% from mid-March to May, so there are fewer and fewer jobs available for people who are now finding themselves redundant or where businesses have closed. And the lower paid jobs have had the steepest decline in vacancy levels. So again, that's got a very direct impact on North Somerset residents if you link that back to the type of jobs that we have in the economy here. We've also seen an average of a 95% increase in universal credit claims across all age groups, and that's not just in Weston, that's in all of our towns and across the whole of North Somerset. So very significant impacts on our residents. So I've talked a bit about our immediate response, so I won't dwell on this slide. So we've done a number of things to try and do as much as we can to manage the impact for businesses in particular. So we'll move on to the next slide. And one of the other things that we've been looking at is trying to understand the longer term trends and changes that the pandemic has brought, and then to start to think about how many of these are likely to remain and business may need to shape itself around, and our new economic plan to shape itself around going forward. So a number on this slide will be ones that are familiar to everybody. So dispersed working or home working or remote working, however you want to term it, is something that has become normal for many workers and is likely to continue. Lots of businesses are now starting to adjust their expectations in terms of office space and are anticipating that many of their workforce will continue to work in a dispersed way going forward. Online retail has become increasingly important and has gained traction. A lot of businesses have responded to that, and they've now become more web-based in terms of how they market their activities and how they sell their products. And again, that is very, very likely to grow further and certainly won't reduce. Many businesses have had to find ways quickly to significantly cut costs and will inevitably have to continue to do so. So the whole process of business planning in a cost-effective way has become increasingly important. The government is looking to sponsor more physical development, building of homes, building of buildings, but also building of infrastructure, building of roads, etc., building of a new infrastructure to support communities. So we need to make sure that we are maximising the potential for North Somerset from that. Prolonged and increased unemployment. So we've talked about the levels of universal credit claims, and we're anticipating that this will increase and only get worse over the coming period. And then managed social distancing is likely to continue not just to the end of this year, but significant time going forward. So again, the way businesses respond within that environment will continue to be a key part of their business planning and how they deliver their services. So all of that leads us to the need for a new economic plan for North Somerset. So I've talked about it being a manifesto for renewal. It needs to build our brand as a place. So what does North Somerset offer to business? How can we support business? How can we promote North Somerset in terms of future and inward investment? What do we need to put in place to lead the development of policy and decision making around that, to influence government, to lobby for funding, to lobby for the eye of new initiatives? And how do we identify interventions that will stimulate the local economy going forward? So the emerging framework, which is still very much a work in progress, is to have 3 core foundations to that. Again, I've mentioned those briefly. So the first foundation being around a green economy. So how do we rebuild our economy in a way which is green and responds to the climate emergency? The second foundation being around our people. So how do we respond to the importance of providing good work for our people in North Somerset and helping them to move from very, very difficult situations they may be in into good quality work going forward. And the third foundation being around digital. How do we respond to all the changes that have come about over the last few months and the acceleration of the importance of digital in supporting our economy? How do we ensure that businesses are working in the most digitally efficient way? How do we make sure that we've got the digital infrastructure in across North Somerset to facilitate that? So those are our 3 core foundations. And then there's a series of delivery mechanisms that sit below that. So one of those will be making sure that our people have got the right skills to be able to respond to the changing nature of the economy. Then there's having the right money, the right funding in place to invest, having the right space in the right places. So we're moving away very much from traditional office space, but maybe still the need for space within town centres for people to come and co-work together, to touchdown space, looking at different ways of articulating space to meet the new needs of business. And then connections. How do you make sure that businesses are connecting with each other and supporting each other? How do you make sure that people can move around in an active, travel-focused way to get to the places they need to be in? And then our places, our high streets, our town centres. How do we need to support those to change in the right way to embrace future opportunity and to respond to some of the very real challenges that we're facing at the moment, including increasing levels of vacancies, traditional retail moving out, and so on. And then there'll be a whole series of delivery strands to that. So how do we promote and stimulate market activity? So how do we get the private sector to invest in North Somerset and to support our recovery? What are some of the interventions that we as the council, working with our partners, can bring into play ourselves? And what are the kind of outcomes that we want to achieve from this? And then just to place this new economic plan in the context of other things that are happening. Joe's talked about our corporate plan, so this is very much informed by some of those core principles within our corporate plan, but it also will inform some of our other emerging strategies in plans, such as our new local plan, which has just gone out for consultation through the challenges, the first stage, the challenges document, our emerging asset strategy, so how we use our buildings, our climate emergency strategy, which I've referred to, placemaking strategies for our town centres, in particular for Weston, the Weston placemaking strategy that's emerging, and then also how do we plan our services so that those best support the new economic plan and vision for North Somerset. So the process, I'd say we're about halfway through now, so it has been a very focused piece of work, and we're looking to conclude it in terms of launching a document in the late summer, early autumn. So we're planning at this stage to bring a document through executive during September, and then there will be a formal launch shortly thereafter. We didn't want to spend too long developing this, which is why we've had a really focused series of sessions with our business steering group, because it's so important to be on the front foot with our economic recovery.
Thank you, Lucy, and that's, I would say, a very comprehensive roundup. There's a great deal of information there. But if you are watching in and you have any questions on any part of that, please again use the Slido app. And I'll just repeat it once more just in case anyone missed it. So you go to www.slido.com, and then the pass to get in is #NSRecovery, all one word. And then any questions. So between Joe and I, or Joe I think is going to pick up the questions and hand them out where necessary. So over to Joe again.
Thank you. So the first couple of questions, clearly the national decisions or the decisions from government around people having to self-isolate for 2 weeks coming back from Spain has sparked off, I think, these questions. So they're both to you really, Matt, and they interlink. So there's a generic question about how we can monitor or enforce isolation following a return from abroad. I'm assuming by default that means a country from abroad where we should be self-isolating for 2 weeks. And directly linked to that was a question about, if somebody was to return from Spain, had got some symptoms, went to get tested and was negative, do they still have to self-isolate for those 14 days? So if I could ask you to answer both of those questions.
Okay, that's fine. Happy to do that. So in terms of monitoring and enforcement, so the enforcement duty around some of the isolation, it primarily lies with the police, potentially, as an action that they would be taking forward. In reality, that's quite a challenging ask of the police, given everything else that they have to do, but the national guidance is that that's where the enforcement would come from, if appropriate. I think that would probably be linked to other factors as well, but that's the duty there. In terms of returning from a country, so the advice to self-isolate would remain for the amount of time, even if you've had a negative test normally, because you would be, because the tests are a point in time, so you might not be positive in that moment, but you might develop further symptoms. So say if you're a family of 4, somebody might have what they think is symptoms, be test negative, but someone else in that household may have had, may actually be holding the virus. So your symptomatic period, and therefore your positive test rather could come slightly later, because it is a point in time test, the test for COVID, so it can happen multiple times before you might actually find that you turn out to be positive. So the advice is, I think the main thing is for anybody who is travelling to and from places where there been specific guidance about self-isolation on return, I think people just need to really stay close to that guidance, keep looking at it, keep checking it, because it's obviously quite a live situation, and just follow really carefully everything that you're advised to do, because all of these different points may change in time. So I can say something now, but it might be different tomorrow. So my advice would be look at the gov.uk website, check to see the conditions for where you're returning from holiday, and make sure you just follow those really carefully. And there are mechanisms to ask questions if you have any through some of the sort of contact centre bits on gov.uk. So use those online mechanisms to check a fact if you're not sure.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. And I guess there's a big call to arms almost, or to action from everybody who's watching, because you will have a tremendous amount of influence within your communities. And I think the key bit for us is how our residents can act in a sensible way so that they are following guidance. Indeed, we all need to be doing that. And just to repeat Matt's messages around hygiene, social distancing, as much as the testing, obviously, if you're showing symptoms. Next question is around citizens' advice in North Somerset and how you can help us achieve the goals, particularly for our most vulnerable residents. I think the first thing I'd say is a huge thank you to the citizens' advice in North Somerset, because there's a tremendous amount of work that you do with our most vulnerable already. And particularly, I'm thinking of recessionary impact, higher unemployment, for example, and the work that you'll be doing with people, giving them advice, for instance, around debt. We do have a number of ways in which we already work with the citizens' advice. I don't know whether there's anything specific Lucy'd like to add to that more generic response.
Thank you, Jo. So first of all, just to agree with Jo, I mean, they've been absolutely critical in helping us understand the data demand and the need in the community. They are part of our steering group looking at economic renewal. So they're helping us to shape and design interventions, particularly how we keep people at the heart of our decision making in terms of economic renewal. So I think that point about us having a real people focus within our new economic plan is really critical. And their involvement and role in helping to shape that has been really fundamental. I think digital inclusion has been something that we've been working very closely with CANS on. So I think, you know, it's critical going forward that we continue to work closely with them on that, because I think, you know, that the point about our strategy also being around digital, it's got to be digital that everybody is included within and is able to access. And I think in terms of data, a strong relationship with CANS is critical going forward, because they've got the real-time on-the-ground data in terms of how financial hardship and economic downturn is impacting on people's lives. So being able to then measure impacts of what we're starting to put in place, we need to have that data to hand. So absolutely got a critical role going forward. Really welcome their support and involvement.
Thank you. The next question is around home-to-school transport. So really whether we could look into special arrangements for students who may have been shielding to get back to school safely in September. There is an example here about Backwell from Yatton, and that's from Councillor Steve Bridger. So I think that's over to you, Lucy.
So our home-to-school transport team are doing a huge piece of work to sort of mobilise for September. I think we'll have to take away that specific question from Councillor Bridger and put it directly to the team, because I don't know exactly what the guidance is. But clearly our objective is to get children to school safely, and we will do what we can within the requirements that we have to be able to do that. So I'm very happy to take that away and to come back directly to Councillor Bridger on that question.
That's great, thank you. I think the next question might be from Councillor Havisham, and it's about, in advance of the government's forthcoming Warm Homes Grant scheme, can North Somerset Council use officer time and council resources to research and explore this? So I think, yes? Councillor Cunniford.
I'm going to come in briefly on this, and just to assure councillors and those listening in that there's been quite considerable conversation already in and around the North Somerset Economy Recovery Group around the opportunities that are available to us as a council in terms of government grants and how we can use that to help with our climate emergency. So before Lucy picks up on any of the particular details, officers have been asked to look into this and spend more time, because it does provide a real opportunity to spend money in our economy locally, but also improve the homes of our residents and help our environmental problems that we are suffering from. So I don't know if Lucy wants to add anything or she thinks that's covered it.
So we have done what we can with the discretionary grants to try and include as many businesses as possible. So I think if there are any out there who don't feel that they've been included, that they should contact us and see if they are eligible, and we can see if there's any support available for them. But we have been as creative as we can to try and ensure that that funding reaches as many businesses as possible.
So the next question is from Steve Ledbrook, and it's about how North Somerset Council can ensure accessibility for disabled people when making changes to roads and pathways to assist with social distancing. So this links back to equality impact assessments, I would say. Lucy, in your area. Can I hand to you?
So, I mean, one of the key priorities of the government funding that we've had to deliver new social distancing measures has been to ensure that there's safety for all. So the need to ensure accessibility for disabled people has been one of the key criteria there. So what we have sought to do is, where pavements are very narrow, to try and make space available, creating one-way systems, so a whole series of measures. I think we have been somewhat constrained by the ability to sort of design some of these schemes in a way where we've got very sort of old high streets with limited pavement space, but we are doing the best we can within the constraints that we have and the ability to use the government funding effectively.
Thank you. The next one is from David Brown, and it's about acknowledging that health outcomes are poor already for people living in our most deprived communities and unemployment is higher. And then a question or a challenge to, I think this is to all of us actually, about how we target interventions to help those in the greater need. I'll start at maybe the most strategic level and then maybe look to others to supplement this, because I think a number of us could come in on this particular point. But, you know, from my perspective, the vision very much recognises the need for us to tackle inequality. So we are already considering using data how we could target interventions across all of our services more specifically. I don't know whether there's anything from a data perspective you'd want to state, Matt, and then maybe come to Lucy. I don't know whether Councillor Caraford, you might want to give a political view as well.
So just to say that, I mean, it's definitely something that's been recognised, not just locally, but nationally as well. And we do have some additional indicators that have been developed by Public Health England that give us a bit more data around some of the health outcomes and how to track those around inequalities and the impact of COVID. So we'll be using some of that information. For example, the Health and Wellbeing Board will be having a focus on how do we refocus our efforts in the light of COVID and to try and tackle the inequalities challenge that is very much in front of us. So we'll be drawing on a range of data. We've also had some interesting and useful reports produced by Public Health England. For example, looking at health outcomes for black and minority ethnic groups in different situations. So I think it's about bringing all of that together. We are looking at the moment, and we'll apply it to the services that we already provide or commission that have a focus on supporting people who might be in danger of having poorer health outcomes. So, for example, our health visiting service is tiered to target greater need. We have a health trainer service that is targeted around people who are living in more challenged circumstances. So it's taking some of that data and then amplifying some of the initiatives we already have and looking at the gaps and where we might need to do some more work, specifically around certain geographic areas or particular communities that are at higher risk.
Thanks, Matt. I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything else, maybe about the schools agenda as well, and I know you and your team are developing a skills strategy.
So one of the key planks of our economic plan is a employment and skills strategy which is in development, and that very much focuses on cohorts of people. It's in draft at the moment, but there is a detailed action plan emerging which aims to work with partners to tackle inequality. So a very strong focus on that. And within that we want to create pathways into good quality employment. That's really important. And I also talked about digital inclusion earlier. So getting that right is absolutely fundamental as well.
Thank you, Lucy. I should have added maybe in my initial intro that obviously one of the key things we did was to suspend our enforcement work and supported people through accessing support for council tax as individuals who were struggling initially through COVID. Councillor Canaford, I'm sure you'd like to come in here as well.
Yeah, thank you. And really just to assure people that this particular council and this particular executive are very keen to narrow that gap between the poorest and the richest in North Somerset. But the way to do that isn't to drag the richest down, it is to find a way of allowing those who have been less fortunate to step up that ladder. And that can only be done with good jobs and skills. And I think the team in North Somerset clearly are working at ways of doing that. It's not an easy task, but we are determined to improve that situation, and I can assure you that we will continue to do that, and our corporate plan is very focused in giving our poorer communities a much better opportunity particularly in this district.
Thank you. There is a question now around how we could maybe help those who are excluded from some of the government support schemes, e.g. some self-employed new starters. So I don't know whether Lucy or Councillor Canafid looks like he's
I think we
keen
can probably
to come
both
in.
pick that up.
Yeah? So Councillor Canafid?
It is frustrating for us all that there are certain sectors who have fallen through the gaps in terms of what the government allow us to do. The first two tranches of support were very clearly set into the council with very rigid rules based around NNDR, so business rates, and then the discretionary grants had very little discretion initially in them. However, we have worked together to try and find a way of trying to throw that net as wide as possible. And if you are still one of the people who haven't been able to get a grant, you do need to, as Lucy said earlier, contact us to make sure that you haven't missed your opportunity or you haven't missed a gap. It's very, very clear to state that we get no benefit if we hold on to this money. This money must go into business and business people's pockets to help us reignite the economy that we all desperately need to see flourishing again. So please, for one moment, if you think you've missed an opportunity, please get hold of our team because they will help advise you through that.
I've just lost my page, apologies. So the final question, I think, was around reopening from the music service, I think. I was just Googling, actually, to make sure I'd got this right. So I think we might have to take that one away because I'm not sure of the organisation completely. I think it might be the music service from my Googling. Anybody else? Sure? Lucy?
Yes, I mean we don't know we don't know exactly what this small business does, but obviously what we're having to do is follow government guidelines that are available, and we're working very closely with regulatory services to understand and interpret government guidelines so that we can provide as enabling, if you like, advice as possible for small businesses so they can understand what they can and can't do, and we can be flexible where it is acceptable within the government guidance. I mentioned earlier that our economy team is available almost 7 days a week. So any businesses that want some specific advice, it's the Multicultural Friendship Association. I mean, I would suggest that they make direct contact with our economy team if business at north-somerset.gov.uk and make an inquiry of them, and we can give some advice.
And I think that's right. We do have an extremely good relationship with this organisation, the Multicultural Friendship Association, so whatever help they need and whatever advice they need, come forward and we can help give that so we can help you get reopened.
And I do apologise that I didn't know what the acronym stood for, so apologies for that. And I think that's the end of the questions. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I don't know whether Councillor Canafid, you'd like to say any closing words?
No, well, yes, otherwise I wouldn't have any. Just simply to thank people for joining us and to particularly thank the officers who are so willing to sit themselves here and be questioned. Normally, as politicians, are more than happy to do it, as I'm sure many people watching in here understand, but officers are so willing to get involved in this, and I think we'd all like to thank them for that, and certainly thank all officers. And when I say all officers, not just the ones that we deal with as councillors, but all those who are working endlessly to try and keep the services running. So I'd like to thank everybody who is involved in North Somerset and our parish councils in keeping all these services running. So thank you very much.